Okay, Chapter 19, How to Authenticate and Authorize Users. This chapter is about securing your website. Unlike last chapter, Chapter 18, where we talked about encrypting the traffic between the browser and the web server, this chapter is more about having people log into your website with a username and password or using Windows authentication, and that way you can secure different portions of your site so only authenticated users can access it. So we're going to be using the Website Administration tool. This is a tool that Microsoft supplied. I forget when they first introduced it, but they last introduced it in Visual Studio 2012. So if you're using Visual Studio 2013, they did remove it from the tool. There is a link I can send anyone that is using Visual Studio 2013 to get get this tool back into 2013. So if you need that, let me know, shoot me an email and I'll send it to you. But we're going to look at that tool that helps us enable forms-based authentication and allows us to do things like create users, create roles, create access rules, and those three things are what we'll be using to secure our website. There's a bunch of controls out of the box that Microsoft provides for us, that .NET provides. There's the login control, login status, login name controls. We're going to look at all those. There's a create user wizard, a password recovery, a change password control that we can also use. Now, these arrived, I forget, .NET 2.0, I think. Before that, we had to create this kind of stuff ourselves using text boxes and running a lot of code. So now, out of the box, Microsoft gives us these controls that provides all this functionality, so it makes it much more easier to implement password, usernames and passwords in our web apps. A lot of people still create their own, but these are there for us out of the box if we need them. There's also a login view control that we can use in conjunction with the rest of the controls if we want to see, the status of whether someone's logged in or not. So authentication, authorization, we'll talk about what they are and the difference between those two. We'll describe how to use forms-based authentication versus, say, Windows-based authentication. We'll talk about how roles, users, and access rules all work together to provide these two services. And finally, we'll talk about the default service provider, the membership database, the ASP.NET DB.MDF file. That's the default that if you're using the tool, it will create this database for you. And it's just a database that's used to store your usernames, passwords, and roles. So what is Windows-based authentication? This is the idea that when you log into your computer, your laptop, you're logging in with a username and password. So you're already logged into Windows. And if you're on a network in Active Directory, chances are that you have an Active Directory domain that your machine that you're working on, your work computer, is already trusted. So it's been joined to the domain trusts your computer. So if you log into your computer, you're logging into the domain and the domain already trusts your login. You don't have to relog into websites that you trust because you're using Windows-based. If the websites are configured using Windows-based authentication, it's basically single sign-on. You sign on to your machine, you go to a website, you don't have to sign on again. The website recognizes who you are. That's great for intranet-based websites where you're in a network that uses Active Directory and trusts the machines that are connected to it. But later we're going to talk about forms-based authentication, which is better for internet, where you're not trusting the machines, you're not using Active Directory. So Windows-based authentication, supported by most browsers. You can set up your website through IIS Management Console to configure it for Windows-based authentication. It uses the Windows users and directory rights already to grant access to pages that that are restricted. And again, most appropriate for corporate type applications. Forms-based authentication is for internet-based applications. So we don't use Windows account. We set up our own ways to add users, and we keep track of our own sets of usernames and passwords. We have a database. And in our example, we're going to look at the ASP.NET DB.MDF file database. But you could use other databases. There's Oracle, MySQL. I could probably even use Excel if I wanted to. So there's other membership providers that I could connect to use other data stores for usernames and passwords, but we're going to look at the default. There's also other third-party authentication services like OpenID and OAuth. This allows you to say, hey, I'm going to go use, if someone's already created a user ID and password by some known trusted authority, I'm just going to have that authority tell me who this person is, and as long as that authority says yes, they're logged in, then I'll trust that authority. So some examples: Facebook, Google, Windows, they all have their own authentication services. So you might have been to a site where it says, hey, would you like to log in using your Facebook ID, or would you like to log in using your Microsoft ID or your Google ID? And you click one of those choices, and you sort of see it flash over to Facebook real quick and verify that you're logged in. So it's communicating with Facebook through a software development kit or an API, and then the app is coming back and saying, okay, Facebook, you said Dave is Dave, so I'll believe Dave is Dave. So you can create in ASP.NET, you can create web apps that use any of those services. There actually are software development kits and APIs out there that you can call, and that way you don't have to worry about storing user credentials. You just use a trusted authority. So how does forms-based authentication work? This is what we're using for our internet applications. And the idea is that if a browser requests a page that is in a protected directory or a secured directory, that the application is going to say, wait a minute, browser, did you give me an authentication ticket that's usually stored with a cookie? If they did, then they get the page back. If not, they redirect the browser automatically, so the user doesn't have to do anything. It says, hey, go to the login page. Or go ask for the login page. Then the browser automatically goes and says, all right, server, give me the login page. The server comes back, sends back the login page, and then the user can fill out their username and password. They post it back. If the login page accepts it, it says, okay, here's the here's an authentication ticket and a cookie for you. And then the browser says, okay, now I can take that authentication ticket and cookie and the original page I wanted and request it from the server, and then the server will give it back. So these a couple of these things happen automatically. What we'll notice, and I'll show you in just a second here, is that when you go to request that, when you get redirected to the login page, it stores the original page that you asked for up in the URL. So that's how it knows how to automatically send you back. So let's show you that. Let's jump out here to Visual Studio. And I'll open up Chapter 19, the book application. So there's not an exercise for Chapter 19, but there is a book example application. So we'll go open that guy up. And this just has some example log. And the application has been secured. There's been several directories where we've said, you must be authenticated to access these directories. I think there's a My Account directory. Yeah, that's it over here. There's a maintenance directory that's also been secured. So we'll talk about how that happens in a minute, but let me just run this and show it to you. I want to show you the forms authentication in action. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for an authenticated or a secured page. So this first page up here, order a product, that's not secure. I can go to that page, see it lets me go to order. Any user can get to that. I haven't logged in yet. If I click edit my account, that's in a secured directory called My Account. So watch what happens. Instead of going to the My Account page, if you look down below there, you can see it pops up. That's the page I'm asking for, the myaccount.aspx page. But instead of getting that page, I get redirected to the login page, see up at the top here. And it remembers, oh, this is where you want to go once you're logged in, but right now we need you to log in. So I can go in there and I can try to log in. And if I get an invalid login ID, it laughs at me and says, no, you still need to log in. We're not going to send you to the authenticated page just yet. We haven't generated that authentication ticket for you. So then I'll say, fine, let me actually log in with the correct username and password. Now it generated that ticket. It went back. My browser said, okay, go ask for the real page with all the right credentials and the authentication ticket. And now I'm able to get to do things like change password or track packages, etc. So that's forms authentication in a nutshell. When we set up authentication in our web site application, we're going to do all the configuration in the web.config file. So this is some of the initial web.config changes that we're going to make, or the tool will make for us when we run it. You can see here we accepted the default. We're using ASP.NET DB.mdf file. It's in our local data directory. We're using the ASP.NET SQL local DB provider. And this is the tool that made that change for us and is going to make some additional changes for us. This is the website, they call this the website admin tool. And basically what it does, it has 4 tabs. It lets us edit, set up security, and then there's some couple other tabs where we can actually make other application settings in web.config and provider settings. So when we go through this, it has this first time security setup wizard that we'll walk through. Then we can look at the different users, roles, and access rules. So when we click on that first time wizard, the first thing it asks us is, how are users accessing our site? Is it from the internet or from a local network? If it's from the internet, it's going to use forms-based authentication. If it's from a local network, it's going to assume Windows authentication. Once we do that, we can come in here and we can start adding roles, and we can add things like manager, employee, visitor, whatever we think is appropriate. We can, there's a create user wizard. This actually uses the create user control that we're going to look at in a bit. So we can go through in there and add as many users as we need and what roles they want the user to belong to. Then we can go through and look at existing users and delete them or add additional ones if we need to. We can set up access rules. This is this idea of saying, hey, there's a group of users and they're all admins. There's another group of users, they're all customers. You set up those rules, and then what you do with those, that's setting up the roles. Once you have those roles, you can then tie those roles to different directories in your application. So admins are allowed to get to the maintenance directory. Authenticated users are allowed to get to the My Account directory. Everyone's allowed to get to the root directory. Those kinds of things. So here's an example where some of the rules have been set up, and you can see that the admin is allowed to everything for the maintenance directory. Excuse me. So admins are allowed to get to the maintenance directory. Then the next rule says everybody's denied. So you might look at that and go, wait a minute, what's going on there, Dave? The order that you set these rules is important. It's read from top down. So the first thing we do is we allow admins. The second thing we do is deny all. So even though it says deny all, we've previously allowed admins. So admins will still be able to get in even though we've denied all here. And in fact, it looks like we have one more rule we're allowing all, but that doesn't matter because we've already denied all. So before I get to the different controls, let me actually jump back out to the application and show you the website configuration tool. So to get to it, there's a couple ways to get to it. I'm going to my Solution Explorer, and I'm going to click on Website and ASP.NET Configuration. That will bring up the website configuration tool. Again, this is only for Visual Studio 2012. If you're using Visual Studio 2013, I'll send you a link where you can still get to this tool, but not the way I just showed you. There's a different way you have to set it up. It's actually a little more complex. So once we have the tool running, here's where I can go into the different apps and select, let's do the initial setup, and we'll walk through here and say, how do we want to connect? We're going to go, this is an internet app. We're going to use the local ASP.NET, the default data membership provider. We're going to use roles for this web app. We're going to set up different roles. Maybe we have an owner. If this is for a shop, we'll add the owner role. So you can see I've set up some roles previously. These are just ways to group my users. Then I can come in here and add new users. Maybe Jerry's a new user that's going to be using my site. Give him a password, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. Jerry at jerry.com or something like that. And there is default, there's different rules for validation against this. So in this case, I try to if I do Tom here and try to do another one and try to have too short of a password, it's going to holler at me that the password is too short. You've got to have an email. So you can change this. It doesn't right now. The default is 7 and 1 non-alphanumeric, but there's configuration in this control where you can change it to different lengths and different other requirements. Clicking next, I get to the access rules. So this is where we can say, now that we have all these roles, let's apply them to different directories. So maybe I'll take the super user role and the root directory and say, the super user can get to anything, so we'll add that rule. And you can see I've got other rules down here. So I'm allowing visitors to my root, which kind of makes sense. They've got to get in to see the initial page anyway. The super users allowed. Looks like I've done that twice. Not a big deal. What is this doing? This is editing the web.config for me. That's all it's doing. And part of the reason they removed this tool in 2013 was because Microsoft just figured out you can go edit the web.config yourself. But some people like this tool. I like this tool. But let me switch over to Visual Studio, and you can see it says, hey, your web.config has been modified by somebody outside of the source editor. Yeah, it's because I used the tool to modify it. So let's go ahead and reload it, and you'll notice when I reload it, watch these entries here will increase. So I'll say yes, and you can see, oh yeah, I put another super user role entry in there. This is just a duplicate. It's not going to matter, right? I get rid of that and hit save. And go back to my tool and refresh. And oh, it's still it must be cached. Let me go back and then next. How about if I clear my cache? That's funny that it still thinks it's in there. Let's finish it. Go back to editing well, so let's look at my roles. Again, I'm curious why it's, okay, I've got my roles. Go back to the home page, go back to my security, manage my access rules. That's what I was looking at, excuse me. Let's manage access rules. Huh, so if I go, okay, so I'm in the channel 19 directory, so I'm going to go over to here and look at the I thought that might have been what happened. The tool snuck behind me and put it back in while I wasn't looking. So look at that. So the tool was right. It had shoved it back in web.config while I wasn't looking. So let me delete it here. I go back over here, and now it's fixed. Okay, good to know. Anyway, just want to make sure you understand the relationship to how the tool is making edits to web.config for you. Probably not a good thing to make changes in, like I was doing in both spots. Use one or the other. Other things to mention, manage users. I talked about that. Manage roles. I talked about that. And again, if I wanted to, I could go to just web.config and make the changes there, setting it up. The application tab is used for other edits to web.config, other application settings, and in the next chapter where we talk about email, you'll actually use this configure SMTP to set up an email server if you have one. So that's just, and again, you could type it into web.config if you wanted. This just does the settings for us. And then the provider just selects what provider you're using, what membership provider. So what is this membership provider I keep talking about? Let me explain that a little bit. Jump back over to Visual Studio. We're talking about this ASP.NET MDF file. That's what stores our usernames and passwords. So if I go look at that, you can see over in our server window, these are the tables that make up that database. So there's a table with the users that have username and passwords, so usernames in there. There's a user in roles that ties what users to what roles they belong to. There's membership. This is actually where the username and passwords get stored. The users get stored here, and then the actual usernames and the passwords get salted in there, so they're not just plain text. And so that's the idea, is that and you don't have to use this database. You could use Oracle or some other database, but that's the default out of the box membership provider that .NET will give you. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is some of the different controls that are available. So there's a login control, and it looks like this guy and gives you a username, password, remember me next time type of thing. You can format it, you can convert it to a template to have further control over it. This is what the markup looks like. So there's a create user text and a create user URL. There's some other attributes that you can set. This is the login name and login status control. So you can say, who are you logged in as, and if you're already logged in, then it'll give you the option to log out. If you're not logged in, it'll say log in. This is the login name and login status in the Web Forms Designer, what it looks like. And let me actually show you that. Let me go back out to the Visual Studio and go to one of the pages. So we'll go to our login page. Whoops, not the menu page, but the login page. And look at that in Designer. So there's the markup, but now as it brings it up in Designer, you can see this is what so we went over to our toolbox. Where did this come from? View our toolbox. And it's not showing me anything because I'm running, so let me stop running for a second. And under login, these are where all these controls come from, right? So someone had come in here and they just drug login over there. Now I have two login controls, which is kind of silly. I wouldn't want to have to. You can see though the difference between the one that I just drug in versus the one that's already there. This one's been formatted a little bit already, right? So someone went in here and did a little auto format and picked a look and feel to it, and that's how you auto format. And the other types of things you could do, convert to template, etc. don't need to. But that's the log, and the other controls are very similar. There's login status, there's password recovery. So you drag them on here, you do whatever configuration. What they have different views. Several of these have so for example, password recovery, you give it your username. When you hit submit, it switches to the asking you for your security question. They hit submit, and then if they were successful, we give them confirmation that the password's been sent to them. So the password recovery works that way. There's a couple of others that are similar to that. The create user wizard. You would enter all your information, and then there's the complete step when they're done. What else? The change password that's got the the original password and then the new password twice to confirm it, and then the next step after that is a confirmation that it was changed successfully. So all these controls are pretty easy to drop on, configure, set up, and then use. Different attributes you can set. Now we talked about the create user wizard and the two screens of that, the password recovery and the couple screens of that. Oh, the one thing to note about password recovery is it can make use of, in fact it needs to make use of the mail, right? It's going to send the user an email to recover the password. So it does, there's just set the mail definition of where the email is coming from, but it also requires you to have a mail server set up and configured in web.config. So in my example, I started to show that if I go back to the web application under application settings, and of course I've timed out. Let me see if I can refresh this guy. Nope, let me close out of it. So if that happens actually a lot, what do? I go back to Visual Studio and just restart it. Go to my application, go to my SMT. So these are my email settings. In order to use that recover password control, I have to have an email set up in web.config. All right. And that's the view with the change password control and the confirmation or success view. Oh, login control also has two views, one for when people are logged in and one for when they're not logged in. And there's a HTML markup defining the two templates for both of them. And this was what it looks like in the browser. This is the menu page of the example app from Chapter 19. We demoed this earlier. There was an order or product page that anyone could get to, and the edit my account page that you had to be authenticated. And then the third one I didn't show, but if you're in the admin role, that you have to be in the admin role to be able to get to that last one. And how do we secure these different pages? The key is, if I jump back out to Visual Studio, is that we have directories for each one of those. So here's the My Account, and you can see the My Account ASP page is in the My Account directory, and there's a web.config in there. If I look at that web.config, it's saying anonymous users, the question mark means anonymous, are not allowed in here. They're denied. So all these pages, change password and My Account, only authenticated users can get to them. In the maintenance page, we have another web.config. It says admins are allowed in, everybody else is denied, and then we added visitors denied just for fun, but that doesn't really mean anything because we denied everybody here, right? And again, the order is important. So since we allowed admins first, they're still allowed in even though we denied everybody else after that. And the presence of the web.config in that directory is what secures that page. So I've got a web.config for this directory, a web.config for this directory, and I have a web.config for the whole root site that can also have authorization rules. So multiple web.configs, one for each directory to apply different authorization rules. So it sort of makes sense now. I don't know that I said it explicitly, but authorization is this idea of allowing people to get to certain things. Authentication is the idea of identifying. Authentication says, hey, how are we going to identify people? And down here we're saying we're using forms authentication, so we're going to go look them up in our own database. Authorization says, now that they've been identified, where are they allowed to go? We looked at the login page when I demoed logging in, the My Account page when I successfully logged in. The maintenance page is admin only. You guys can play with that on your own. I'll let you leave something for you guys to check out. And we've already looked at the directory structure and how what different web.configs apply the rules to the different directories and the pages in those directories. I mentioned in those rules, the asterisk is for all users and the question mark is for all unauthenticated users. All right, so take a look at the sample app in Chapter 19 under Book Applications. They have some, try, if you have Visual Studio 2012, try out the website admin tool. If you have 2013, shoot me an email and I'll send you a link where you can find it in 2013 or how to add it back to 2013. If you have any questions, hit me up in the Q&A panel in the live meeting or feel free to shoot me an email. Thanks.